Hi, I'm Emily Branch, Conversation Health's Head of Community, and I'm here with Tess Exshaw, Lead NLU Data and Insights Analyst, to talk about real-world examples of medical nuance and our evolving machine learning strategy. Hi, Tess. How are you today?
I'm good. Hi, Emily. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So my first question for you is, what is intent data?
So intent data is what teaches the virtual agent to understand the questions of healthcare professionals and be able to provide them with the appropriate and compliant response. So let's take an example. If a user says, "What's the dosing of this drug?" Here, the topic behind that question is dosing. That's what the user is asking about. So that's an intent. It's basically a topic. But there are different ways that someone might refer to the dosing topic. Tell me the dosage, what's the dose? So we need to make sure that we train that topic with different types of questions to refer to that specific topic. Those questions, we actually refer to them as utterances. In all those questions that I just said, what's the dosing of this drug? Tell me the dosage. What's the dose? You can see that there's a remarkable term that is kind of common to all those questions, the word dosing. So here, dosing is actually an entity group, and an entity group is a group of synonyms. So here, the dosing entity group holds synonyms such as dosing, dosage, doses, etc. So to recap, we have our topics that are trained with different types of questions that use groups of synonyms. And this collection of questions and groups of synonyms are what we refer to as training data.
How do you obtain this intent data?
So intent data both comes from our team of professional medical data analysts, but also from past user queries. So past questions that were asked in the virtual agent that have been categorized by our team of healthcare professionals. To go back to training data a little bit, more specifically to the entity groups are super important for intent distinction. So to make sure the agent can identify which topic the user is referring to. So in the dosing topic, it's going to be the only topic with the entity group dosing being the only entity group used in those questions. There won't be another topic that has a question just with the entity group dosing. So it helps to make sure that the agent knows how to categorize the questions coming in. But on the top of that, it actually provides for a much better trained agent because it significantly expands the number of training data points that we have. So if you go back to that example, what's the dosing of this drug? And you know that dosing is an entity group with different types of synonyms. So that same question is actually going to be multiplied by the number of synonyms we have in the dosing entity group. What's the dosing of this drug? What's the dosage of this drug? What's the dose of this drug? So really expanding the number of questions we have to train that specific topic. So the technical complexity of intent data layered with the medically nuance of being a medical virtual agent is why we have a team of professional medical data analysts that deal with everything related to intent data.
How do you use intent data?
So intent data really starts with the conversations. Once we receive the conversations, we need to audit them to make sure that no two conversations are too similar. Because if two conversations are too similar, the agent is not going to be able to know which conversation to pull depending on the question of the user. So first step, we audit those conversations. The second step is what we call intent mapping. So that's when we read every single conversation and we map all the potential topics to those conversations. Once we've identified all the different topics that should be answered by those conversations, we go through the training data process. So creating all those questions with their related groups of synonyms. Once that step is done, we basically go through validation. And at that point, the agent is able to recognize any question associated to those topic and pull the appropriate linked conversation to those topics.
How can pharma brands improve their messaging and content using intent data?
So in a world where healthcare professionals are super busy running around from patient to patient, it's important for pharma companies to be able to provide them with the information they need when they need. Currently, if they're looking for a specific type of information or the response to one of their questions, they have to find the document in question, actually parse through that document, and hopefully find the information they're looking for. So not super practical and not very easy or digestible. Intent data provides all of that. It's easy, accessible, and digestible, thus really simplifying the healthcare professional journey with getting information on that pharma brand. On the top of that, they can get extra resources or additional support. So it really simplifies their whole journey with getting information on that pharma brand. But on the top of that, the insights that we can gather from the interactions of the healthcare professionals with our agent are super important to be able to improve the content that pharma company has in the virtual agent. What I mean by that is that pharma companies tend to have a very set idea of the frequently asked questions of their HCPs. But when you have the anonymity of the virtual agent, HCPs are much more comfortable to ask certain questions they might be embarrassed to ask to another human. And so we're actually able to identify the real frequently asked questions. Once we have this information, we can give it to the pharma companies and they can act on it, make sure that extra conversations are created that will answer all those questions. And if not, make sure that the content and resources are easily accessible so they stay up to date with the current questions HCPs are asking about for that particular brand.
What intent signals can you detect?
So as we all know, in a healthcare environment, it's very important to be able to catch any adverse event or product complaint. So to make sure that any adverse event or product complaint are never missed, we use a very black and white logical process called the keyword catching mechanism. So we have an adverse event keyword catching list, and part of that list, we have all the words we want to make sure that the agent will always capture and give the AE flow if the user said that specific word. So let's say I have the word headache as part of my AE keyword catching list. And the user said, my patient is experiencing a headache. In that case, the agent is going to identify headache as being part of the AE list and is going to provide the AE flow. I noticed you mentioned an adverse event. Are you looking to report one? Yes or no? In that specific case, the user would select yes and get the appropriate AE reporting forms related to it. But what if the user said, are headaches a common adverse event of this drug? They're not wanting to report an adverse event per se, but we want to make sure we never miss any AEs. So because it's part of the list, it's still going to trigger the AE flow. So in that case, I noticed you mentioned an adverse event. Are you looking to report one? Yes, no. And the user would probably select no. So in that case, it actually goes through our NLU model and tries to match that question then to one of the topics we have in the virtual agent. If we had a topic covering the most common adverse event of this drug, that conversation would be pulled when the user presses no. So at least we make sure that no AEPCs are missed, even though that was not the intention behind the question. So we have the adverse event and product complaint reporting keyword catching mechanism, which is the first step the agent goes through anytime a question comes through. But what if the agent wasn't able, once it goes through the NLU model, to actually match that question to a topic? So let's say the user said, what's the weather today? We wouldn't have that topic covered in one of our medical virtual agents. So in that case, we would actually go through a fallback. So the agent would say, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood your question. Would you mind rephrasing? So that's the fallback. But what if the question that is being asked can't really be matched exactly to a topic, but has potential possibilities of topics that it could be matched to? So let's say the HCP asked, what's the dosing for pediatrics patient? And that particular virtual agent had a conversation about dosing and a conversation about use in pediatrics, but didn't cover the topic dosing in pediatrics. So in that case, the agent would go through what we call clarification management. So it would clarify what the user is asking about. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understood what you're referring to. Are you asking about dosing or use in pediatrics? Those options would be displayed as button, and the user can then select the appropriate button and get the conversation associated to it. So at least we're making sure that we're not assuming what they're talking about, because we never want to give them the incorrect response, but we're making sure that they still get a better user experience because they get the opportunity to clarify and press on the button and get the conversation related to that specific topic.
How can pharma brands use intent data to better foster relationships with HCPs?
Intent data allows pharma companies to really build a personalized experience for HCPs. They can get the information whenever they want it, easily accessible and digestible. So it makes their journey to get information much more easier and personalized because it's answering the questions that the HCPs are having in the moment. But on the top of that, it can also have call to actions. So let's say ordering samples of the drug or talking to a sales rep. So it can really have the whole journey of the healthcare professional and give them some call to action, really simplifying the whole journey with that specific pharma brand. On the top of that, all the valuable insights that we get from the transcripts, from all the questions that were asked by the users in that virtual agent, allow pharma companies to stay up to date with the current questions HCPs are asking about and make sure that the content associated to those questions is readily available, accessible, and created, and they stay up to date with all of those queries.
Well, thank you, Tess, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.